Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Aquastar Benthos Heritage 1 Blue Edition. This watch is available from aquastar.ch in two versions. On the Isophrane rubber strap, the price is €1,003. On the Bezel bracelet, the price is €1,187 respectively. This piece is a heritage reissue of the original Aquastar Benthos 500, made in 1970, made to modern day specifications. The Heritage 1 is a faithful heritage reissue of the original Benthos 500, made to the exact same dimensions, therefore it has a 42mm tonneau case diameter. However, Aquastar appreciates that many collectors would prefer a heritage reissue of the original Benthos 500 from 1970, made to a more contemporary modern case size. So they've also made this piece on the right, the Heritage 2, in a 40mm tonneau case diameter. So good to have the option for purists, the Heritage 1 in 42, alternatively the contemporary version, the Heritage 2 in 40mm respectively. So I'll compare both pieces in the wrist shot later in my review and detail the differences in the dimensions of the two respective pieces. So firstly, let's look at the case that the watch comes in, and then I'll talk you through the specifications of the piece. So the watch comes in this aluminium tube case, which has a rubber cap. One removes the rubber cap, which is a snug fit, and withdraws the foam sleeve. Foam sleeve splits in two, and as you can see, we have two cutouts. The top cutout houses the plastic warranty card, and the lower cutout protects the watch in shipping from any damage. So I'll show you the warranty card. On the front of the plastic warranty card, we have the iconic Aquastar star emblem, Aquastar text logo. On the reverse, it details the terms and conditions of the 2-year international warranty, and at the base, there's space to fill in the serial number of the piece, the reference number, and the date of purchase. And it also has the website, aquastar.ch. Now, I want to clarify, the Heritage 1 is a limited edition piece of 500 pieces, so that's something to note. Each of the pieces are numbered with unique serial numbers, and this is number 10 of 500. And of course, 500 fits because this is a heritage reissue of the original Benthos 500 from 1970. The one thing that's absent, and I'd like to see Aquastar include, is an owner's instruction manual in the form of a printed booklet with clear, concise diagrams, instructions in English detailing the operation of the movement used, which is the Sellita Caliber SW200-1 automatic Elaborate grade. As an alternative to a printed owner's instruction manual booklet, they could simply have a card with a QR code that could be scanned with an Android or iPhone, and that would download the owner's instruction manual. But nonetheless, good to see a warranty card included, and good to see 2 years of international warranty. I want to give due credit to Aquastar here for this, because often mid-tier brands only cover their watches with a 12-month international warranty. So to clarify, mid-tier is €500 to €5,000 respectively. On the Bezel bracelet, this is €1,187, therefore it's clearly a mid-tier piece. 2 years of warranty is excellent at this price point, and they deserve full credit for that. So as I've detailed, the Heritage 1 is available in two versions. If you don't like the Bezel bracelet, they also supply it on an Isophrane rubber strap. Now I want to clarify, this is a genuine Isophrane strap, it's not a copy. So Isophrane have been making straps since 1968. The straps are designed in Switzerland and they're manufactured in Italy. So I'll take out the strap and show it to you. It's made from FKM floor rubber, which has a beautiful vanilla scent to it. So as you can see, top side is perfectly smooth, underside is perfectly smooth at the buckle and tang end, and then at the spring bar end it has grooves in it and also cutouts, and this is the iconic design of Isophrane straps. And the benefit of the cutouts is it allows for air circulation, also allows for sweat and perspiration and seawater to wick away from the wrist. So if you wear the watch for sea diving, which is its intended purpose, the seawater can quickly dry away from the strap and the wrist due to the cutouts. Also plenty of slots. This will fit from a minimum 6-inch size up to a maximum 8-inch size, so it will fit around a wetsuit, so it's correct length. I like the 3D profiling of it, and as you can see, it's got the iconic pattern of the Isophrane strap and the angular cut to the end of it rather than being straight. I'll show you the buckle and tang end. So as you can see, angular profile to it, and it has a flat profile to the tang, which is good, engages very well with these slots in it. Nice heavy gauge to it, and as you can see, it's signed. Just bear with me, I'll get the camera to focus on it. The underside is signed with Isophrane, and it has the R in a circle, which denotes it's a registered trademark. So Isophrane, as I've detailed, have made straps since 1968, and you can tell this is a genuine Isophrane strap, because if you look at the spring bar end, you can see it says made in Italy, and it has the correct serial number of the strap, 52020. So this is a genuine, designed in Switzerland, made in Italy Isophrane. We also have two sliding keepers, and the first one has the angular profile, which is correct, and the second keeper is straight and parallel, and they slide up and down. And again, at the buckle and tang end, we have these grooves which aid the sweat and perspiration and seawater wicking away from the wrist and also out through the cutouts. So very aesthetically pleasing. Isophrane straps are excellent quality. This is made from FKM Flora rubber. So to clarify, FKM Flora rubber is more durable and robust than silicone rubber. Silicone rubber is more soft and supple, but however, it's not as robust and durable long term. Often silicone rubber straps have a tendency to split and crack around the spring bar end. They're not as durable as NBR, nitrile butadiene rubber, natural rubber, and FKM Flora rubber. FKM Flora rubber has the added benefit of being more soft and supple than nitrile butadiene rubber. So nitrile butadiene rubber straps are the most durable, the most robust, because they are chemical, acid and UV light resistant. Nitrile butadiene, or NBR rubber, is often used in the aeronautical or automotive industries due to its chemical resistance, acid resistance and UV light resistance. For example, it's used in rubber gaskets and seals. But however, the negative is it's more stiff. So it is robust, it's very durable, but it's stiffer than silicone rubber and FKM Flora rubber. This really is a compromise between the two, because it's more durable and robust than silicone rubber, but it's more soft and supple than nitrile butadiene rubber. So really, FKM Flora rubber sits between the two, between nitrile butadiene and silicone rubber respectively. It's the perfect choice. Also, it has a lovely vanilla scent to it, which smells absolutely gorgeous. And I like that this is a genuine Isophrane strap made in Italy, not a copy or replica of it. Now, Aquastar have a rich brand heritage from the 1960s, and Aquastar have very kindly gifted me this hardback book, Aquastar Anatomy of a Design by Dr. Peter McLean Miller. This is very concise, and it details the entire history of the Aquastar brand, including their most iconic pieces. So just bear with me and I'll detail what those pieces are. So the brand was founded in the 1960s in Switzerland, and they still make their pieces in Switzerland to the present day, including the Heritage 1 and the Heritage 2 that I'm going to be showing you. So inside we have the index, and it details the iconic Aquastar pieces. Now, I've previously reviewed the Deep Star 2, which is a heritage reissue of the Deep Star. So the iconic pieces that Aquastar made from the 1960s are as follows: the Deep Star, the Aquastar 60 and the Benthos 500. And I'm going to be showing you the Heritage 1 and also the Heritage 2 versions of the reissue of the Benthos 500. This book is absolutely beautifully written, because we have high definition pictures of the originals from the 1960s, such as the Deep Star, which is iconic, and also going through the book, it details the heritage reissues of the pieces, as you can see, and also it details the other models, such as the Deep Star, and also the Aquastar 60, and also the Benthos 500. Now, the Benthos 500 is, I would argue, the most iconic Aquastar piece, and it is an historically important piece. And why do I say that? Well, the Benthos 500 from 1970 was the world's first dive piece to have 500 meters of water resistance without a monoblock case. It was nothing unusual, and here's a picture of it. It was nothing unusual for a monoblock case piece in 1970 to have 500 meters, but the Benthos 500 you're looking at in this picture, this is the original from 1970. It was the world's first dive piece with 500 meters. Aquastar deserve full credit for that. They deserve respect for it, because it was something that Rolex were not able to do. It was something that Omega were not able to do. It was something that Doxa were not able to do. 500 meters, but not using a monoblock case. They used a screwed-on case back and a tonneau case. Now, as I've detailed, the Heritage 1 is a faithful heritage reissue of it, made to the exact same dimensions, so it has the same 42mm tonneau case, but as I've detailed, Aquastar also appreciates that many collectors would prefer a heritage reissue of the Benthos 500 made to a more contemporary modern case size. Therefore, they've also made the Heritage 2 version of it in 40mm respectively. So it's good. The Heritage 1 is 42 as per this original from 1970, and the Heritage 2 is 40mm, which is more contemporary. And as you can see, high definition pictures of the originals, absolutely beautiful. Details the entire history of the brand, the entire history of every Aquastar model, including the movements, the calibers used, right up until the present day, the Heritage reissues, such as the Heritage 1 and the Heritage 2 respectively. Excellent read, and it even details the unique design characteristics and the diagrams showing how they were designed, the click spring for the bezel mechanism, also the crown used. It's just fantastic reading because it really does give you all the information, even the case designs, and I think this is a fantastic read if you are a purist Aquastar collector and you have an appreciation for the Deep Star, Aquastar 60, and of course the Benthos 500, which I consider to be the most iconic Aquastar piece. Excellent hardback book, and I'm very pleased to receive that as a gift. And lastly, they very kindly gifted me this Aquastar baseball cap, which has the iconic star and Aquastar logo embroidered, which is very nice. So, with regards to the specifications of the piece, as I've detailed, this is a faithful heritage reissue of the original Benthos 500 made in 1970. It has the exact same dimensions as the Benthos 500. Therefore, we have a 42mm case diameter. We have a lug-to-lug measurement of 47mm, a thickness of 16.2mm, and a lug width of 20mm. The beads of rice bracelet tapers from 20mm at the lugs down to 18mm at the 2-button push micro-adjustment clasp. Now, normally I would be critical of a 42mm piece not using the perfection personified 20-16 taper, which I often refer to in my previous reviews, because it is the industry standard for good reason. 22-18 is the industry standard, or alternatively 20-16 respectively. But however, on this occasion I'm not going to be critical of the 20-18 taper because this tonneau case has the exact same dimensions as the original Benthos 500. It's 42, and it's also a thick piece at 16.2. That's necessary because it was the world's first dive piece with 500 meters of water resistance without a monoblock case. It has a screw down case back. So therefore, the head of the piece is heavy and it does need additional meat on the bracelet links. 20-16 subjectively would look good visually, but it wouldn't add enough meat, enough heft to the bracelet and the micro adjustment clasp on the bracelet. The bracelet would feel too light. This tonneau case in 42 really does need a heavy bracelet to balance it because it is a top heavy piece, and one would expect that because it is thick at 16.2 as per the original Benthos 500. So 20-18 looks good. It's straighter, more parallel than the 20-16 taper, but it does add meat, it adds heft to the piece, and it does balance it better. So they've made the correct decision. 2-button push micro adjustment clasp with ratcheting mechanism, which is excellent. Now this is a notable update, and it's something I really like about the Heritage 1. So to clarify, the difference is the Heritage 2 uses the earlier flip-lock clasp, as you can see, which has a lighter gauge to the press body. Also has 4 micro adjustment holes in the flanks. Now, I'm pleased to see this update to the Heritage 1. It's better. This is the original. Now, purist Aquastar collectors will appreciate this because this style of flip-lock clasp with the drilled holes in the flanks, it is true to original bracelets which were used in the 1960s and 1970s. This is the style of flip-lock clasp that was used on the original pieces from the 1960s and 1970s. Therefore, I'm not going to be critical of it because it's a heritage reissue of a 1970 piece. However, difficult decision to make for Aquastar because when a brand makes a heritage reissue of a 1960s, 1970s or 1980s piece, they have to make the decision balancing between visual aesthetics of a 1960 vintage piece and modern day specification. For example, they have to choose between sapphire crystal and acrylic, and they have to choose between using a bakelite bezel or aluminium bezel insert and sapphire crystal or ceramic bezel insert. They also have to choose between using a pressed flip-lock clasp, as used on the Heritage 2, and a modern day contemporary ratcheting mechanism micro adjustment clasp. This is better. Heavier gauge to the milled body, and also flawless brush satin finishing to the body, flawless brush satin finishing to the flanks, and we've got this large mirror polished bevel which marks the transition. No sharp edge to the top edge or the low edge, doesn't have sharp corners, low profile, it's not too bulky, curvature is excellent for 6 to 7 and 7 to 8 inch wrists. Proportions are excellent. 10mm of ratcheting micro adjustment, which is excellent. This is good to have on the fly adjustment. It's a better clasp. Visually it looks better proportions, and also better to have 10mm of on the fly adjustment versus the 4 micro adjustment holes in the flanks. However, it's subjective. Purist Aquastar collectors will appreciate a more vintage looking flip-lock clasp as per this Heritage 2 clasp. However, Many collectors will appreciate the modern day updates, the contemporary standard of a ratcheting micro adjustment clasp at this price point. I prefer the micro adjustment clasp to the original clasp. We have a flat sapphire crystal with clear AL coating, and the clear anti-reflective coating does an outstanding job of reducing the glare and the highly reflective nature of the silver mirror polished applied indices at 12, 9, 6 and 3 and the silver mirror polished baton handset. This H1 or Heritage 1 version is true to the original, because if you look at the arrowhead or triangle tip to the contrasting orange secondhand, this does look exactly the same as the 1970 Benthos 500. So this handset will particularly appeal to purist Aquastar collectors versus the contemporary upgrade or update to the Heritage 2 or H2. You can see the second hand is different. We have a contrasting orange second hand, but it doesn't have the triangle tip to it. I prefer the original handsets. I prefer the purist design of it, and I think this is beautiful. Contrasts very well with the blue dial. One thing I like about this piece is they've upgraded or updated the bezel insert. Now, the original had an aluminium bezel insert, which was very aesthetically pleasing. It had 60-minute ticks, rather like a Rolex 5517 milsub. So legibility was excellent, and the Arabic numerals, the 10, 20, 30, 40 and 50, were clearly legible. But however, again, they've got the balance correct between vintage aesthetic from 1970 and modern day specification. They've upgraded the bezel from aluminium to ceramic, and of course, needless to say, ceramic is superior. It's harder and more scratch resistant, and they've also engraved it and fully lumed it with X1 Super Lume Nova, another notable modern day enhancement. In terms of aesthetics, it still does retain the aesthetics of the original Benthos 500 from 1970, because we still have the 60-minute ticks, the fully loomed triangle, and also the Arabic numerals. So the markings are correct as per the original, but of course modern day benefits of being hard and scratch resistant. Flat sapphire crystal is the correct choice because, as I've detailed, the dimensions of this piece are a faithful heritage reissue of the original Benthos 500 from 1970. Therefore, 42mm tonneau case is exactly the same as the original. We also have 16.2 thickness. Subjectively, one could be critical of the thickness and say, well, 16.2 is very thick. Yes, it is, but one has to appreciate this was the world's first dive piece with 500 meters without a monoblock case. It has a screw down case back, and they've got the balance correct because this is made to the exact same dimensions as per the original 1970 Benthos 500. That was also a very thick case because it wasn't a monoblock case. It also had a thick case back. The thickness is necessary. It does need a thick stainless steel case back because we're not looking at a 200 or 300 meter water resistant piece. Also, it needs a thick sapphire crystal to withstand 500 meters of pressure. So the flat sapphire crystal is thick enough to withstand 500 meters. The screw down stainless steel case back is also thick enough to provide 500 meters of hermetic seal. Thickness is necessary. I would be critical of the thickness if it were 200 or 300 meters. That's a given, but this is 500. And if you compare this to other 500 meter pieces or 500 meter plus pieces, such as the Rolex Sea Dweller or Deep Sea, or the Omega Planet Ocean, for example, they also are very thick pieces. It is a necessity to have a thick head of the piece, thick sapphire crystal, and thick case back for 500 meters or 500 meters plus. That is just the way it is. But my favourite aspect of this piece, above all else, is the finishing to the tonneau case. Visually, this is identical to the original finishing on the Benthos 500 from 1970 because we've got this sunburst pattern to the brush satin finishing, which is absolutely gorgeous. The sunburst finishing has a beautiful luster to it, and it's got a fine grain satin finish, and the quality of the sunburst finishing to the top of the tonneau case is perfection personified. To clarify, this is high tier level case finishing at a mid-tier price point. So, to remind you, mid-tier is 500 to 5,000 euro. This is €1,187 on the beads of ice bracelets, therefore one would expect mid-tier level finishing to the head of the piece. This is not mid-tier level, this is high-tier level, €5,000 plus finishing to the tonneau case. The sunburst pattern or sunburst finish to the brush satin finishing to the top of the case is absolutely gorgeous. I love the way it refracts the light. Longitudinal brush satin finishing to the flanks, and it's got a nice fine grain satin finish. Again, this is high tier level finishing on a mid-tier piece. The case finishing is done to perfection, but it's also true to the original. The other thing I really like about it is it's not a thick slab-sided case. Now, it is a thick case, but what I'm referring to is the profiling of the flanks. One would expect this to have tall slab size to it, bearing in mind it's a very thick tonneau case as per the original, but it doesn't, because it has low profile flanks, and they've also enhanced it because it's got this large mirror polished bevel machined into the undercut, and then they've mirror polished the bevel to a flawless standard. The benefit of this large mirror polished bevel on the undercuts to the flanks is it deletes the sharp edge, therefore it enhances comfort level and feel good factor, but also reduces some of the meat from the flanks. So therefore visually, although it does have a curved profile to the tonneau case, the flanks aren't too thick. They're not too slab-sided. The large mirror polished undercut improves the look of it, but also the feel of it. It doesn't have a sharp edge to the undercut, therefore it wraps around the wrist. The thing I really like about it is the lug to lug, which is surprisingly compact for a 42mm tonneau case. It has a 47mm lug to lug, and you'll know from my previous reviews, 48mm is the sweet spot. That is the perfect lug to lug, regardless of whether you have a 6 to 7 inch wrist or a 7 to 8 inch wrist respectively. So needless to say, it is a large piece. It does dominate the wrist as per the original Benthos 500, but although it's 42, the case isn't too long. It's 47. It's 1mm shorter than the perfect 48 sweet spot. So this does fit smaller wrists surprisingly well, and of course it's best suited to collectors with a larger wrist. So let's look at the bracelet in detail. Beads of Rice bracelet. Now, this does visually remind me of the NSA bracelets which were made in Switzerland from the 1960s through to the 1980s before NSA died out. Very similar Beads of Rice bracelet used on the Doxa Sub 300T. Also similar bracelets were made by NSA for other 1980s brands such as Hoya with a deep diver. So visually this Beads of Rice bracelet looks very similar to a Doxa Sub 300T bracelet, or alternatively the HGP NSA bracelet which I previously reviewed. Solid end links are a good tight fit to the tonneau case, and they've got the profiling of the end link correct because the profiling of the end link matches the tonneau case very well, and they've profiled the shape very well. Nice tight fit to the tonneau case. End link in the Beads of Rice bracelet articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, that's the benefit, doesn't have excess play, longitudinal, lateral, side to side or up and down play. To clarify, quality control, build quality and tolerances of this Beads of Rice bracelet is better. It's higher level tolerances and higher level finishing, higher level quality control than the Doxa Sub 300T Beads of Rice bracelet, which I was critical of because it was sloppy. This is more refined. Let's check the other side for continuity. Again, articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, that's the benefit. Doesn't rattle, nice and tight. Doesn't have excess longitudinal, lateral, side to side or up and down play. Interference friction fits, which is good. This is better than the Beads of Rice bracelet on the Doxa Sub 300T. It's more refined, build quality is better, quality control is better. Visually, it's finished to perfection. Flawless mirror polishing to the Beads of Rice centre links, and that contrasts with the flawless brush satin finishing to the outer links. As you can see, beautiful lustre to the brush satin finishing, and that complements the flawless brush satin finishing to the flanks. Correct profile to the Beads of Rice links. They're thicker at the spring bar end, and then they gradually taper down in thickness down to the 2-button push micro adjustment clasp. No sharp edge to the top edge or the lower edge of the flanks, so it doesn't pull arm hairs, that's the benefit. Also doesn't feel sharp, doesn't feel scratchy, doesn't feel rough against the wrist. It's deburred and chamfered very well. Articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, the links flow nicely, which is good, but it's not sloppy. So to clarify, when I previously reviewed the Doxa Sub 300T, the bracelet also articulated freely, which was good. Problem was it was sloppy. Too much play in the pushpin links. It rattled, it was sloppy. Longitudinal, lateral, side to side, up and down play. This one has got the balance correct because it feels tight enough to articulate freely without being stiff and kinking, but it's not sloppy as per the Doxa Sub 300T Beads of Rice bracelet. Feels nice and tight. Let's check the other side for continuity. Again, articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, so that's good. Doesn't rattle. It's nice and tight. They've got the quality control, build quality, tolerance is good. Again, no sharp edge to the top edge or the low edge of the flanks, doesn't feel sharp or rough, doesn't feel scratchy, doesn't pull arm hairs. It's an excellent Beads of Rice bracelet. Let's look at the clasp in detail. So as I've detailed, this is an upgrade that features in the Heritage 1. It's an upgrade to the original flip lock clasp, and just to remind you, this was the original flip lock clasp, as you can see, and it's pressed stainless steel with 4 micro adjustment holes in the flanks, light gauge, and one could be critical of this, although purist aquadive collectors will appreciate the vintage aesthetic of it. This is better, and I think they've made the correct decision by upgrading it with the Heritage 1, because you can see solid milled body has a heavier gauge, beautiful brushed satin finishing to the body and the flanks. Of course, it's signed with the iconic blue Aquastar emblem, which is very aesthetically pleasing. I like the blue tone of it. Large mirror polished bevel is very aesthetically pleasing. That deletes the sharp edge on the transition. 2 button push triggers are brushed satin finished, and they are correctly proportioned. Nice firm resistance to the spring-loaded action, opens freely. Solid mill 316L grade stainless steel mill clasp, beautiful lustre to the top side, underside and flanks, no sharp edges to the top edge or the lower edge, so it doesn't feel sharp. Centre section has been deburred and chamfered very well, so no sharp corners. Let's check the hinge pins. Left-hand hinge pin articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, doesn't have excess longitudinal, lateral, side-side, up and down play. Interference, friction, fit, quality control is good. Let's check the centre hinge pin. Articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, doesn't have excess play in any direction, nice and tight. Finally, let's check the right hand hinge pin, which is a spring bar. Again, articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, doesn't have excess play, nice and tight, pleasant surprise. This is an example to other mid-tier brands of how to make a solid milled stainless steel clasp correctly with interference friction fits in the left hand, centre and right hand hinge pins. Nice and tight. Benefit is doesn't rattle, it's not sloppy. No concerns whatsoever about the long-term durability because the pins are nice and tight. They're not sloppy, therefore they're not put under excess shear load. They're not going to fail with daily wear and tear. This is an excellent micro-adjustment clasp. So on the underside, we have engraved adjust into the spring-loaded trigger and an arrow of direction, and you can press it in with your fingernail or alternatively thumbnail. So the trigger is heavily sprung-loaded. You've got to press it in firmly with your thumbnail or fingernail. This is good because you're not going to accidentally deploy it when on wrist with wrist presser. So pressing it in firmly fully deploys it. So it's now on maximum extension. Pushing it back in has got a nice positive click. Loud audible clicks, heavy ratcheting mechanism, feels reliable, feels robust, sounds good, feels good. 10mm of on-the-fly adjustment is good. So I'm going to test it again, deploying it. It deploys smoothly. So pressing it in with a thumbnail, nice heavy resistance, deploys smoothly and clicks back in with nice heavy positive clicks. Good solid ratcheting mechanism. I like the heavy clicks and it's not sloppy. When it's at its minimum, doesn't have excess play, so it doesn't rattle, feels reliable and robust. I'm going to check it for play. Maximum extension again, good. Doesn't feel sloppy, doesn't rattle. The width of the bracelet is the correct width for the internals of the body. So refinement is there. This is good. The thing I like about it is it's not too bulky. And we'll look at this in the wrist shots. The curvature is nice. This is a nice slight curvature which is suitable for 6 to 7 and 7 to 8 inch wrists. But what I like about it is we've got 10mm of micro adjustment, which is good, but it's not too thick. Often micro adjustment clasps are too thick. They're too bulky, they're too wide, and they're also too long. Problem is the length. Often with smaller wrists, they have too much overhang and they also stick too proud from the wrist because they're too thick and bulky. This is low profile. And bear in mind, it is a wide micro adjustment clasp because the taper on the bracelet is 20 to 18 versus 20 to 16. So it does need to be wide for the 18 end of the bracelet. But it's not too wide. I think the proportions of it are excellent. Visually, it looks very aesthetically pleasing, beautiful lustre to it. I love the large mirror polished bevel on the transition and the iconic Aquastar emblem. It's very aesthetically pleasing. So it's nicely proportioned, nice curvature to it, no sharp edge to the undercuts. So this enhances the comfort level when you're wearing this for long periods of time, such as 8 to 12 hours per day. Right, so let's test the bezel execution. So, as I've detailed, contemporary update to the bezel insert. It's not aluminium, it's ceramic, it's fully lumed, which is good. But the bezel itself is gear tooth profile, satin finish versus mirror polished, which gives it a tool watch or military issued aesthetic, also a vintage aesthetic, as per the original Benthos 500 from 1970. So the gear tooth profile is the same as the original 1970 Benthos 500, which is good. I like the profile of it. It's aggressive, it looks masculine, and also it looks like a tool watch rather than a dress piece. They've made the correct decision by not changing the bezel profile from gear tooth to scalloped bezel or coin edge bezel because that wouldn't look so aggressive. This aggressive gear tooth profile to the bezel matches the tonneau case. It gives it a real 1970 look. So gear tooth teeth are grippy and tactile. One can get good purchase with one's index finger and thumb. This is good, as per the original Benthos 500, because if you wear a wetsuit and you wear a glove, and if your hand's wet, The gear tooth profile being aggressive and grippy and tactile means even with a wet glove you can get good purchase on it. So it feels grippy. More grippy than a coin edge bezel, more grippy than a scallops bezel. Gear tooth bezels are very robust, but they're also very grippy. So one notable update that you may be surprised by is this does not have 60 clicks as per the original Benthos 500 from 1970. They've updated it to the contemporary standard, which is 120 clicks. Now, purist Aquastar collectors might be critical of this. They might prefer this to be 60 clicks as per the original. I prefer 120 clicks, which is the contemporary industry standard, because it feels smoother. Nice, loud, audible clicks. Feels even all the way through the 360 degrees of rotation. Doesn't get tighter or lighter, which is good. Feels smooth. This is the benefit of 120 clicks versus 60. 60 clicks feel heavier, they sound heavier, but they also feel heavier. You can feel the clicks being engaging with 60 clicks. And one could argue it's rougher, it's not as smooth and refined as 120. 120 gives a smoother feel, but still has nice loud audible clicks. You can still hear and feel the clicks being engaging with 120 grooves machined into the underside of the gear tooth bezel. Medium resistance, doesn't feel too heavy and solid, doesn't feel too light. It feels just right. They've got the balance right between it being heavy and loose, and it feels smooth. I like the smoothness of it. I like the feeling that it doesn't get heavier or lighter. No lateral side-side play, it's tight. No back play whatsoever, it's tight. So although it has medium resistance rather than heavy resistance, it feels tight in terms of lateral side-side play, and in terms of back play, feels very good. Sounds good, feels good. Finally, let's check the alignments. I've gone too far, so I'm just going to go back round again and bring it up slowly. One more click. Perfect. The fully loomed triangle perfectly aligns with the 12 o'clock index on the dial and the 60-minute tick on the chaptering. This is an example to other mid-tier brands of how to get bezel execution correct. They have perfected it. No lateral side-side play, no back play, even all the way through the 360 degrees of rotation. Perfect alignment, 10 out of 10. Feels good, sounds good, it's excellent. Right, so let's test the screw down crown execution. Solid 316L grade stainless steel crown, coin edge finished. Matte satin finish to it, which matches the tonneau case. They've made the correct decision here by not mirror polishing the coin edge crown, because that would not match the bracelet and the tonneau case and the bezel finishing. So to clarify, with a mirror polished bezel, regardless of whether it's a gear tooth bezel, scalloped bezel or coin edge bezel, when the bezel is mirror polished, the crown should always be mirror polished to match. When the bezel is satin finished with brushed satin finishing, the crown should be satin finished to match. Same applies to the tonneau case. With the flanks to the tonneau case, they're brushed satin finished longitudinally. That matches the brushed satin finishing to the beads of rice bracelet, the flanks. So for example, often mid-tier brands and mid-tier micro brands, they make the mistake of a clash between the bezel, the crown finishing, the head of the piece and the bracelet finishing. For example, they'll have a polished bezel but a satin finished crown, or they'll have mirror polished flanks but then the flanks to the bracelet will be satin finished. What I like about this piece, and Aquastar deserve credit, is they've got the finishing correct. There's continuity of finishing throughout this piece. Bezel, head of the piece, crown and the bracelet, because we have got brushed satin finishing to the gear tooth bezel, brushed satin finishing to the flanks of the tonneau case, matches the brushed satin finishing to the crown, matches the brushed satin finishing to the flanks of the beads of rice bracelet. No mirror polishing, that's the benefit. This gives it a tool watch aesthetic. It doesn't look like a dress piece, it doesn't look too shiny. So correct finishing. Large chamfer which deletes the tips of the coin edge teeth, that's good. It projects enough at the 10 o'clock position to be grippy and tactile even if you're wearing gloves. For example, if you're wearing a wetsuit and you've got a wet glove, you can still get good purchase on the crown. Doesn't project too far at the 10 o'clock position to dig into the back of the hand when you flex the wrist, and that's good. It's large enough to be grippy, it's partially recessed into the right hand flank of the tonneau case. I think they've got the proportion correct. Large enough to be grippy and get good purchase, but not too large to stick out and dig into the back of the hand. Domed cap to it, which is matte blasted effects, and we've got an embossed Aquastar star emblem, which is finished to perfection. Let's test the execution. Silky smooth. Minimal number of turns required to fully unscrew it. Perfect interface between the internal thread of the stainless steel crown and the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. Silky smooth. This is sublime screw down crown execution. Quality control, build quality, tolerances are excellent. And I really like the quality control in particular because you can feel the meshing of the threads is perfect. The internal thread of the crown, perfectly meshes with the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. 500 meters of hermetic seal is incredibly strong specification. That's something one also has to be mindful of. We're not looking at a 200 or 300 meter water resistant screw down crown. This is 500. It is exceptional. Despite being 500, it doesn't look too large because you would expect this to be scaled up in proportion to provide 500 meters of hermetic seal, because needless to say it needs 3 hermetic seals, 3 rubber O-ring gaskets. 200 meters can be attained with 2 rubber O-ring gaskets, one inside the crown, one inside the crown tube. 300 needs something like a Rolex trip lock with 3 hermetic seals, 2 inside the crown, 1 inside the crown tube, for example. 500 usually needs a larger crown because, of course, the crown is subject to more pressure, as is the rubber O-ring gaskets inside it, so therefore often 500 meter pieces have a larger crown. This looks correctly proportioned. It's not too large, but 500 meters is strong. So when it's unscrewed, one can manually wind the Sellita caliber SW200-1 automatic to its maximum 40-hour power reserve. Feels nice and smooth, doesn't feel rough or gritty. The SW200-1 is a clone of the ETA 2824-2, so there's no discernible difference because they share the same architecture. The only difference in the architecture is the SW200-1 used in this piece has an additional joule added. It has 26 joules versus the 25 joules of the ETA 2824-2. But the architecture is the same other than that, and there's no discernible difference. When you manually wind an ETA 2824-2, it feels exactly the same in terms of smoothness as this caliber SW200-1. This is an elaborate grade, and therefore it's regulated in 3 positions, but in terms of smoothness, feels good. Doesn't feel rough or gritty. One can feel the tension in the mainspring gradually building up. Pulling it out to the final click position hacks the movement. So if you look at the contrasting fluorescent orange triangle tip on the second hand, you can see it's now stopped dead, so therefore it's possible to set the time precisely to the second with the SW200-1. Nice foam resistance to the gearing, the meshing feels very good and feels reliable and robust, and again no discernible difference between the ETA 2824-2 and the SW200-1, which is a clone of, and feels very smooth. I like the solid feeling of the gearing, the meshing feels good, feels nice and tight. Minimal backplay. When you rotate the coin edge crown, there's an almost immediate response to the baton minute hand. You don't have to take up a lot of slack. There is a mechanical reason for the slack in the meshing of the gearing. If it did not have the slack in the gearing, some backplay, when you push back in the crown, that would cause the minute hand to jump out of position. So there's a mechanical reason for the backplay. There is some slight backplay in the meshing of the gearing, the teeth. And it's good because when you push back in the crown, the minute hand remains static. It doesn't jump out of position. So that's the reason for the backplay. Some backplay is okay. Pushing it back in, it's got a nice positive click, and that restarts the movement. You can see the contrasting triangle tip of the orange second hand begins to sweep around the dial, characteristic smooth 4-hertz sweep. So hacking works well, time setting works well, manual winding works well. Let's test screwing the crown back down. Instant thread pickup. There's a perfect interface between the internal thread of the stainless steel crown and the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. This is a very smooth screw down crown. To put this into perspective, it's every bit as smooth as the Rolex trip lock crown used on my Submariner to dates, and that really is the test. That is the industry standard because the Rolex trip lock is sublime. This is as smooth. It's silky smooth. Perfect mating, perfect pickups between the threads. You don't have to rotate the crown anti-clockwise and clockwise over and over again to get the threads to mesh, to get them to pick up. The internal thread of the crown meshes or mates instantly with the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. The refinement is there. If I had to choose one word to describe the crown, it would be refinement. So sublime. They deserve credit. Quality control, refinement is there. Right, so I'll give you a wrist shot of both pieces and I'll discuss the differences in the respective dimensions. So, as I've detailed, this Heritage 1 is a faithful heritage reissue of the Benthos 500 from 1970s, exactly the same dimensions. So to remind you, 42mm diameter, and we've got a relatively compact lug to lug of 47, lug width of 20, which is correct. This is as per the original. Now, the notable dimension you want to be mindful of, 16.2. Normally I'd be critical of a piece being thick, and top heavy at 16.2. On this occasion I'm not, because the original Benthos 500 from 1970 was the world's first dive piece with 500 metres without a monoblock case. It was an incredible achievement, and as I've detailed, it was wholly necessary to have a thicker sapphire crystal to withstand 500 metres and that added thickness. It was wholly necessary to have a thicker case back to provide 500 metres of hermetic seal. A thicker case back and a thicker sapphire crystal, of course, add thickness to the piece, and it did make it 16.2. But that was necessary because it did not have a monoblock case. It had a screwed down case back. So yes, 16.2 is thick, but one has to appreciate that was how the original Benthos 500 was. It was a thick piece at 16mm. This is a faithful heritage reissue of it. The dimensions are exactly the same. Now, purist Aquastar collectors will appreciate this is identical in dimensions to the original Benthos 500. It is a true heritage reissue. It's a purist collector's piece. And bear in mind, it is a limited edition of 500 pieces, and therefore it is highly collectible, as per the original Benthos 500 is now highly collectible, because it is an historic important piece, the world's first 500 metre water-resistant dive piece from 1970 without a monoblock case. The Benthos Heritage 1 you're looking at is a perfect heritage reissue of it. So I'm not going to be critical of it. Now, it is thick, but it's surprisingly short in terms of lug to lug because it's 1mm below the sweet spot of 48. So on my large 8-inch wrist, you can see it does dominate the wrist, it does have wrist presence, and yes, it does feel like a top-heavy piece. It also does have heft, as one would expect, of course, because it's a tonneau case, which is very thick. So this is 205 grams, but however, it does come on an incredibly long beads of rice bracelet, and as you can see, I can easily slide 2 fingers beneath the bracelet and clasp at all times. Bear in mind, this is on the maximum of the 10mm micro adjustment in the ratcheting mechanism. So this is the absolute maximum. This will easily fit a 9-inch plus wrist, but of course, the intended purpose of this piece is to be worn for sea diving around a wetsuit, and therefore it needs a longer beads of rice bracelet. For larger wrists, for example, if you have an 8-inch wrist and you're wearing a wetsuit and a glove, you're going to need the additional length on the bracelet to fit around a wetsuit. Good to see plenty of links in the bracelet. To clarify, there are enough removable links on the 6 o'clock and the 12 o'clock side of the bracelet to size this down to a minimum 6-inch wrist size. So 6 inches the minimum with all the links removed, up to 9 inches plus, as you can see, plenty of length on it. So this is good for larger wrists, it's good if you're going to wear it for sea diving with a wetsuit. As I've detailed, normally I'd be critical of the taper because you'll know from my previous reviews, I often refer to 20 to 16 as perfection personified because I consider it to be the perfect taper. 22 to 18 is the other industry standard because it's very aesthetically pleasing. This uses 20 to 18, which is less common, but however, I'm not going to be critical of it because, as I've detailed, it's a top-heavy piece, therefore the bracelet needs some additional meat. If this were on a 20 to 16 bracelet, the bracelet would feel too light. It wouldn't have enough meat on it. It does need that additional meat because it does taper down in thickness of the links from the spring bar end, the head of the piece, down to the clasp, gradually tapering in thickness. That does reduce some of the meat. So 20 to 18 visually does suit it because it is large at 42. So surprisingly comfortable piece to wear, even though it is thick. 42 does give wrist presence, but of course it's very satisfying because it feels masculine. It feels like a tall watch. This visually does look and feel exactly the same as the Benthos 500 from 1970, which of course it is a heritage reissue of it. I really like the look of it. It looks like a real tool watch. And as I've detailed, my favourite aspect of the tonneau case is the sunburst pattern to the brass satin finishing to the top of the tonneau case, as per the original. It's got a beautiful lustre to it, and it complements the satin finishing to the aggressive gear tooth bezel. So, contemporary specification because we've got sapphire crystal versus acrylic, and of course we've got ceramic bezel insert versus aluminium. Therefore, the sapphire crystal is harder and more scratch resistant, the ceramic bezel insert is harder and more scratch resistant, but there's a perfect colour tone match between the dial and the bezel, same blue tone. Visually, it's very aesthetically pleasing. Baton handset is correctly proportioned as per the original Benthos 500, and the orange triangle tip to the contrasting second hand is very legible because it's fluorescent orange, but also visually looks very similar to the original handsets used on the Benthos 500. Feel good factor is excellent. Comfort level is okay. I can't say the comfort level is excellent because clearly this is intended for collectors with a larger wrist, and clearly it's intended to be worn around a wetsuit. So Comfort level is okay, and I say okay because it's good if you wear it for sea diving around a wetsuit, and it's good if you wear it on the Isophrane strap, because the Isophrane strap will of course delete a lot of the heft. On the Bezel bracelet, it does have heft, it's 205 grams, but bear in mind it is on a very long bracelet. If you remove 6 or 8 links from it for a 7 to 8 inch wrist, that's going to delete the heft down to 180 grams or below. And of course that will make it more comfortable and wearable. But nonetheless, on the Bezel bracelet, it does feel like a top heavy piece. That's something to be mindful of. The micro adjustment clasp has good curvature to it, as I've detailed. Regardless if you have a 6 to 7 or a 7 to 8 inch wrist, it's not too bulky, it's not too thick, and it's also critically not too long. Often micro adjustment clasps are too long, particularly for collectors with a 6 to 7 inch wrist. The curvature is correct, but the problem is they're too long and too bulky. They stick too proud from the wrist. This curves around the wrist very well, and even though it's an 18mm bracelet at the clasp end, the clasp is not too wide, it's not too thick, and the curvature is correct. Beautiful luster to it. So the clasp is excellent, and it adds enough meat on to the bracelet to help balance the top heavy piece. So yes, it is thick, but on a positive note, look at the curvature. The large mirror polished bevel, which is machined into the undercuts to the flank, it reduces some of the meat from the tonneau case, but also enhances the comfort, because you can see it wraps around the wrist rather than just sitting on top of the wrist like a rectangular slab of 316L grade stainless steel. So proportion of the tonneau case is good, curvature is good, and yes, it does have a bubble back case back, which we'll look at, but it's not too deep. We don't have a large gap beneath the undercuts to the tonneau case. So feel good factor is good, comfort level is okay, and I say it's okay not because of the dimensions or the fit, it really is down to the heft of the piece. It doesn't actually look and feel like 16.2. Now needless to say, this isn't going to slip underneath the shirt cuff if you wear business shirts. I often in my previous reviews refer to 13mm and below as the sweet spot if you wear business shirts. At 16.2 you're not going to fit this under a business shirt. So as a daily wear piece, one could say, well, it's impractical. If it were 13, it would be more practical, but this is not a daily wear piece. This is a tool watch. This is meant for sea diving. This is meant to be worn around a wetsuit. It's a tool watch. So therefore 16.2 is acceptable because you're going to be wearing it around a wetsuit, not underneath a business shirt. That's the reality of it. Visually looks good. If you want to reduce the heft, you opt for the Isophrane strap version. That's the sensible option. I would say if you have a 6 to 7 inch wrist, the Heritage 2 would be a better option because it's 40mm, and I'll give you a wrist shot of that in a moment. But if you have a larger 7 to 8 inch or 8 inch plus wrist size, you'll enjoy the masculine look. You'll enjoy the wrist presence of the 42 tonneau case, and of course purist Aquastar collectors will fully appreciate it has the identical dimensions to the original Benthos 500. So it really comes down to your personal taste. Are you a purist? For example, are you a purist Aquastar collector that appreciates the original Benthos 500 because it's an historic piece, or do you prefer the more contemporary sizing of a 40mm? Well, let's try the Heritage 2. So as I've detailed, the Heritage 2 is a scaled down version of the Heritage 1. This is 40. Again, I haven't sized the bracelet, and you can see there are enough links in it. I can easily slide my index finger beneath the bracelet and clasp at all times. This indicates this will fit up to a 9 inch wrist or comfortably fit around a wetsuit. Now, note, I'm on position 4 out of 4 on the micro adjustment holes in the flanks. This is its maximum, but I can easily fit an index finger. So I've got an 8 inch wrist. This will easily fit up to a 9 inch wrist or around a wetsuit. Similar taper to the Bezel bracelet, but there is one notable difference, and it's not just the 40mm diameter. So as you can see, this also has wrist presence. Visually, it does look very aesthetically pleasing because it looks similar to the Heritage 1 or the original Benthos 500 from 1970. But there is one notable difference to the tonneau case. It's the thickness. So to remind you, the Heritage 1 I just showed you is 16.2. This is far thinner. It is 12.4. Now, I've referred to the sweet spot as 13mm because that is the perfect thickness, 13 and below, for a piece to easily slip underneath shirt cuffs if you wear business shirts. This is more suitable if you have a smaller 6 to 7 inch wrist. Visually it does give the aesthetic of the Benthos 500, but it's a scaled down version in 40mm versus 42. Huge difference in thickness. Heritage 1 is 16.2, not going to easily slip underneath a shirt cuff. This is only 12.4. And I want to give due credit to Aquastar here because this piece is incredibly thin. Bear in mind it is SW200-1 powered. Now, if this piece were manual wind mechanical powered or alternatively quartz powered, I would say 12.4 is nothing special. But to get a piece which is powered by the SW200-1 automatic with a rotor and a case back that needs to provide adequate clearance for the rotor below 13mm is incredible. 12.4 is very low profile. You can see the benefits. Comfort level and feel good factor is enhanced. Minimal gap beneath the undercuts to the flanks, and again it's got the large mirror polish bevel which deletes some of the meat from the slab sided flanks, which is good. Correct lug width 20mm, minimal gap beneath the tips of the lugs. This piece will fit you regardless of whether you have a 6 to 7 inch wrist or a 7 to 8 inch wrist respectively. The 40 is a scaled down version. Comfort level is good, feel good factor is good. There's another notable difference in the heft. This is 169 grams. So to remind you, the Heritage 1 with all the links in the very long bracelet is 205. It's a very heavy piece as one would expect. 205 grams with the Heritage 1 versus this piece 169. And bear in mind it does also have a long bracelet. So you're going to be removing 6 links if you have a 7 inch wrist, and you're going to be removing 4 links if you have an 8 inch wrist. But needless to say, it's going to reduce it to circa 150 grams if you have a 6 to 7 inch wrist, and therefore 150 grams and below is the sweet spot. So this is very comfortable. Also, because it has this flip lock clasp versus the solid milled micro adjustment clasp, that also reduces a lot of heft from the bracelet, because this is pressed stainless steel versus solid milled. It's lighter gauge. It reduces the heft. Bracelet taper is visually similar, so it does have enough meat on it. It does look visually aesthetically pleasing, but the tonneau case is 40 versus 42. So lighter piece at 169 versus 205 grams, lower profile piece at 12.4 thickness versus the 16.2. Again, purists will dislike this because purist Aquastar collectors will prefer the Heritage 1 being a faithful heritage reissue of the Benthos 500 with the identical dimensions and 16.2 thickness. The 42 tonneau case is the same. However, contemporary collectors will prefer the modern day sizing of this Heritage 2 piece with the smaller case, 40mm. The other thing to note is this has a more compact lug to lug. It's 45 lug to lug. So to remind you, the Heritage 1 has a 47 lug to lug. It's 1mm below the perfect sweet spot of 48. This is more compact, and it's really noticeable. The lugs are shorter. This is only 45. So 2mm difference, 47mm with the Heritage 1 versus 45 of the Heritage 2. More compact case, shorter, minimal gap beneath the tips of the lugs. So particularly if you have a 6 to 7 inch wrist, the Heritage 2 is clearly the choice. If you have a very large wrist of 8 inches plus, clearly the Heritage 1 is the choice. Or if you're a purist Aquastar collector, of course you'll prefer the original dimensions of the Heritage 1. So really comes down to personal taste. Do you prefer the more contemporary 40mm tonneau case size, or are you a purist and do you prefer the original Benthos 500 case size of 42? Of the two, the comfort level and feel good factor of the Heritage 2, it has the edge over the Heritage 1. Visually, I would say the Heritage 1 is very aesthetically pleasing, and it is a pure heritage reissue of the original Benthos 500 because of the dimensions. But in terms of comfort level and feel good factor, if you're going to wear the piece as a daily wear piece for 8 to 12 hours per day, clearly the Heritage 2 is the best option. However, if you're going to wear this on the Isophrane rubber strap, that's going to reduce the heft, and of course that will improve the comfort level and feel good factor if you wear it for long periods of time. But the 40, clearly on the beads of rice bracelet, is the correct choice, because even with all the links in the bracelet, it's only 169 grams. So I would say Heritage 1 on the beads of rice bracelet is the correct choice. Sorry, Heritage 2 in 40mm on the beads of rice bracelet is the correct choice. If you're going to go for the Heritage 1, consider the Isophrane strap, because that will reduce the meat or the heft of the bracelet. It will delete it because the Isophrane rubber strap is a lot lighter. Right, so let's do a Lume test, and we'll see how the Lume performs when it's charged up to the absolute maximum. So as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge it up to the absolute peak. So both the Heritage 1 and Heritage 2 use the same X1 superluminova. Right, so that's now fully charged, and as you can see, stellar performance. This has not disappointed. We're clearly looking at 5 to 6 layers of X1 superluminova on the fully lumed ceramic bezel inserts, the applied indices, and the baton handset. Fantastic. In daylight, there's a perfect colour tone match. The bezel, the dial and the hands have the same white tone. The X1 doesn't look more cream or white. It's white on all three places, bezel, dial and hands. And in the dark you can see there's a similar green tone to the fully lumed ceramic bezel insert, the dial and also the handset. Excellent. 5 to 6 layers. They've done an excellent job of engraving the ceramic bezel inserts because the triangle, the hour markers, the Arabic numerals and the minute ticks are all fully loomed with 5 to 6 layers. The exciter is potent, it's glowing brightly and it will continue to glow for a good length of time. Now, purists might be critical of this because they will say, well, the original Benthos 500 used tritium and of course an aluminium bezel insert. It did not have a fully loomed bezel with tritium. The triangle, the minute ticks, the hour markers, and of course the Arabic numerals were not loomed with tritium, which was radioactive and then discontinued and succeeded by Luminova, and then Luminova was succeeded with Superluminova. But, however, contemporary collectors will appreciate the balance. And again, Aquastar deserve credit here because it is difficult when they do a heritage reissue, when brands do a heritage reissue, to get the balance between vintage aesthetic of 1960s, 1970s and 1980s vintage pieces and modern day contemporary specification such as sapphire crystal, ceramic bezel insert, Superluminova. And they've got it correct because they've upgraded the tritium to X1 Superluminova, which is good. But they've also used a fully loomed ceramic bezel insert rather than just using an aluminium bezel insert with a lume pip. So performance is good. Aesthetically, the green tone of X1, it does look lighter than C3, but it does look like tritium, which is good. And I think it's good. I think they've made the correct decision by upgrading to a ceramic bezel insert and also sapphire crystal. And you can see performance is fantastic. They haven't used the cost-cutting measure of 2 to 3 layers or 3 to 4 layers on the ceramic bezel insert, the dial and the hands. This is fantastic. Right, so let's look at the case backs because this is a notable difference between the Heritage 1 and the Heritage 2. So this is the Heritage 1, as you can see, and we've got a forged case back. Now, you'll know from my previous reviews, I really like forged case backs. Forged case backs are pressed with a hydraulic press. The benefit of a forged case back versus an engraved or embossed case back is you can have this 3D embossing, which is forged. It's hydraulically pressed into the case back rather than engraved, and it's very deep. But if this were engraved, the problem is the engraving of the star emblem and the Aquastar would be sharp and it would feel rough against the wrist, and therefore it diminishes the comfort level and feel good factor of wearing the piece. The engraving looks aesthetically pleasing, or the embossing looks aesthetically pleasing, but the problem is it feels sharp. With a hydraulically pressed case back, with a forged case back, you get this deep 3D embossing, but it's smooth. It doesn't have any sharp edges to the embossing. Therefore, the comfort level and feel good factor is enhanced. I really like forged case backs for that reason. Now, the other thing I want to remind you of is this Aquastar Benthos Heritage 1 Blue Edition is a limited edition of 500 numbered pieces, and in the case back around the circumference it's got engraved limited edition 010/500. So this is number 10 of 500 numbered limited edition pieces. This adds value to the piece because it's a limited edition and also makes it more collectible as per the original Benthos 500 from 1970, which is now highly collectible. And I really like it. I like that each of the pieces are engraved with limited edition and their serial number, which is the 010 of 500. They're numbered pieces of 500. Excellent to see that engraved. The circumference is engraved with the specification of the piece and the reference number, and it also details the years, 55 years from 1970 to 2025, which confirms this is a heritage reissue of the Benthos 500. So I really like the embossed Aquastar emblem, and I like that it says Aquastar. And Swiss, of course, and the mirror polishing to the circumference, the outer portion, is absolutely flawless. Milled slots are deburred and chamfered very well. Now, it is a deep bubble back case back. Normally, I'd be critical of this, as you'll know from my previous reviews. If this were an SW200-1 powered piece, and it were 200 metres or 300 metres, with this depth of bubble back case back, I would be highly critical of it, as you know. However, on this occasion, I'm not going to be, because this is not 200 metres or 300 metres of hermetic seal. 500 metres is incredibly strong specification. And if you reference this, if you compare this to other 500 plus water resistant pieces such as the Tudor Pelagos, the Omega Planetocean, the Rolex Sea Dweller or the Rolex Deep Sea, that's the level of specification we're talking about. All of those pieces also have very deep profile, thick case backs because it is a given. 200 meters and 300 meters, you can reduce the thickness of a case back with an automatic, but with a 500 meter piece, you really do need that thickness of case back in order to provide an effective hermetic seal to 500. If they used a thinner case back, of course it would distort. So this is the reason for it, and it's wholly necessary. Although it is 500 meters, it's actually surprisingly low profile. Yes, it is a deep case back, but one has to appreciate the SW200-1 is a thick caliber, and it does need clearance, adequate clearance between the inside of the case back and the rotor to prevent the rotor fouling it. But the other thing to note is the centre section has a 3D embossing because it's forged or hydraulically pressed, and of course that does add some thickness to the case back. But you can see it's not too thick. I think it's just right. Quality of the finishing is stellar. Finishing to the underside of the tonneau case is stellar. Flawless mirror polishing to the underside, nice large chamfers which delete the sharp edges, or bevels rather, to the undercuts to the flanks. The 4 tips of the lugs have nice bevels that deletes the sharp corners, and I'm pleased to see the correct choice of quick release stainless steel spring bars in the end links. That negates the need for a spring bar tool if you want to exchange the beads of rice bracelet for the Isophrane strap. So, had they used standard spring bars with a mirror polished case like this, there's a risk of slipping off the spring bar and scuffing and scratching the mirror polished lugs. But the benefit of quick release spring bars is you don't need a spring bar tool. So that's a good idea. Mirror polishing is excellent. Finishing to the end links is excellent. Quick release spring bars are the correct choice. So, beautiful curved undercuts, nice large bevel to the undercuts to the flanks, and the case back, although deep because it's 500 meters, it's not too deep. So it is good. Now let's compare this to the Heritage 2 case back because it's different. Now, as you can see, different design to it because we've got scalloping around the circumference. I'll turn it around and you'll be able to read it the right way up. So as you can see, we have Aquastar's emblem, Aquastar, in the cursive font, which is very aesthetically pleasing, Benthos in the original font. The scalloping of the teeth are mirror polished, and then the background is matte bead-blasted effect. Subjectively, one could say this is more aesthetically pleasing. Why? Because it's more like the original case back used on the Benthos 500 from 1970. So purists will particularly appreciate the scalloping of the teeth. However, this forged case back is more contemporary looking, as you can see. And I like the 3D embossing of the Star and Aquastar Swiss. And of course, the mirror polishing is absolutely gorgeous. This is a very well executed case back. In terms of finishing, it's outstanding. It really comes down to your personal taste. Do you like the more vintage aesthetic of the scalloping of the teeth? And of course, longitudinal brush satin finishing in the centre section. This is laser etched, so it's smooth, doesn't feel sharp or rough. And the circumference is engraved with high definition engraving and the specification of the piece. So they've done a very good job of the engraving. And again, this is limited edition. It's one of 500 pieces and it's numbered, so it's good. So regardless of whether you purchase the Heritage 1 or Heritage 2 version, they are both 500 piece limited editions, and of course they're both numbered pieces. So that's something to bear in mind. End links are a good tight fit to the head of the piece, but however, we've got standard spring bars, and I would like to see this upgraded to quick release spring bars as per the Heritage 1, and I've detailed the reason for that. It's beneficial. Thing to notice, there's a difference in the finishing of the heads of the pieces. So, the Heritage 1 has mirror polishing to the underside to the tonneau case. This Heritage 2 has concentric CNC lathe tool machining, which is brushed satin finished. And you can see it has a satin finish to the case. It really comes down to which is your personal taste. Do you prefer mirror polishing, or do you prefer concentric CNC lathe tool machining to it, which gives a satin finish? Needless to say, it has the same beautiful large undercuts to the flanks of the case, large mirror polished bevels. This enhances the comfort level because it deletes the sharp edge to the undercuts to the flanks of the tonneau case, and the 4 tips of the lugs have been beveled, so there's no sharp corners. In terms of comfort level and feel good factor, the Heritage 2 has the edge over the Heritage 1, as I've detailed. More compact lug to lug, flatter case back, and the curvature is similar to the tonneau case, but of course the overall benefit is 12.4 thick, so it feels lower profile. Does have the same wrist presence, it's 40, it's large enough. But in terms of the depth of the case back, this is what I want you to be mindful of. If you look at this Heritage 2, you can see the case back has a flatter profile to it. And bear in mind, this is 500 meters water resistance we're looking at, but look how flat the case back is. Very low profile. So the benefit of this flatter case back is, of course, this piece has been reduced from the 16.2 millimeters of the Heritage 1 down to only 12.4. And really it's down to the case back profiling. You can see it's a much, just bear with me, I'll get the camera to focus on it. It's a very flat case back. So far flatter case back with the Heritage 2, and just to compare it, you can see the Heritage 1 has a thicker, deeper bubble back case back to it. And that does add significant thickness. It makes the piece 16.2. So that's really what you need to consider. Depth of the case backs and also thicknesses of the pieces. And just to remind you, I'm going to give you a side profile shot. So you can see this is the Heritage 1 at 16.2. And this is the Heritage 2 at only 12.4. So massive difference in the thicknesses, 16.2 versus 12.4. That's what I want you to be mindful of. Right, so finally let's discuss the movement use because it's my favourite aspect of the piece. So both the Heritage 1 and Heritage 2 are powered by the Sellita Calibre SW200-1 automatic, which is the Elaboré grade of it. So it has 26 joules. It's a clone of the ETA 2824-2. The architecture of both movements is the same. The only difference in the architecture is the SW200-1 has an additional joule added. It has 26 joules versus the 25 joules of the aforementioned ETA 2824-2. It runs at 28,800 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 4 Hz. Has hand winding and hacking, which are useful complications, and it does have a dates complication. Now, subjectively, one could be critical and say, well, the SW200-1 has a date. Why didn't they put a date window at 3 o'clock or 6 o'clock and use the date complication? However, purist Aquastar collectors are going to be subjectively not critical of it and say, well, the original Benthos 500 from 1970 did not have a date window or date complication. This is more true to the original. I think they've made the correct decision by not using a date complication. Having a date window at 3 or 6 would spoil the symmetry of the dial and the originality of the Benthos 500 dial. This is true to the original. I prefer it without a date complication. The negative is, of course, phantom date setting position, but that's just what one has to be mindful of. That's a characteristic of the SW200-1. It does have a date wheel and date complication. So the Elaboré grade of SW200-1 is regulated in 3 positions to a stated accuracy of ±7 to ±20 seconds per day, so rather wide accuracy range. However, I'm pleased to report that Aquastar are doing a good job of regulating the calibre SW200-1s they're using. This one is running consistently at +5 seconds per day. +5 is actually within COSC chronometer limits of -4 to +6. So to remind you, stated accuracy of the Elaboré grade is ±7 to ±20. It's regulated in 3 positions. Clearly +5 is well within the stated ±7 to ±20, but it's actually chronometer accurate of -4 to +6. +5 is excellent when fully wound to its maximum 40-hour power reserve. Correct choice of movements. The thing I like about the SW200-1 is it's a reliable, well-proven workhorse Swiss calibre. Feels smooth to manually wind. Hacking works well. Setting the time works well. I like the smoothness of the manual winding. I like the reliability of it. It doesn't feel rough or gritty to manually wind. And with regards to quality, I regard it as equal quality to an Elaboré grade ETA 2824-2. There's no difference to it. Alternatively, a Soprod calibre P024, which is also a clone of the ETA 2824-2. Of the 3 movements, there's no difference in build quality, quality control, materials and finishing. The P024, the ETA 2824-2 and the SW200-1, they're all equal in Elaboré grade. Accurate movement, 40-hour power reserve is good, hacking is good, hand winding is good. Correct choice at this price point. So last I'll summarise the piece. What do I think of it overall? Well, when I'm considering reviewing a watch on my channel, the watch meet 2 criteria. It should be both excellent quality and excellent value at the respective price points. Yes, this is unquestionably excellent quality, and yes, it is unquestionably excellent value. At €1,003 on the Isophrane rubber strap, alternatively €1,187 on the Bezel bracelet. I'm going to declare it a champagne watch for lemonade money. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Aquastar Benthos Heritage 1 Blue Edition. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you for watching.